Hello everyone, my name is Zachary Herman. Thank you for joining me for this virtual session of the NCTM 2020 Leadership Conference. It's a real honor to be here, especially in this moment of time, to engage with all of you in discussions about some very important topics. I was a high school math teacher for several years, and I'm currently at the Penn Graduate School of Education working with teachers and leaders from across the globe. My session is titled Taking on Almost Impossible Problems. And while I figured that title might resonate with many of us today, the title actually stems from several years ago. During the 2016 presidential election, during the Democratic National Convention, there was a review video highlighting Obama's presidency. And in that video, there was a quote that really struck me. It was from one of his advisors, and he was describing the work of the president. And he said, "Nothing comes to the desk of the president unless it's almost impossible, and he has to figure it out." And immediately I was struck, what sort of education prepares someone to take on almost impossible problems? In other words, what sort of education prepares someone for the demands of the presidency? What would that education actually look like? And even though we know that not all people, not all of our students will one day become president, we do know that all of our students will face almost impossible problems. So what would an education that actually prepares them for those demands look like? And what would that mean for us as a society, as communities, and so on? So I want to take that frame, this almost impossible frame, what sort of education prepares students for that sort of reality, and apply it today to the educators. We are also facing almost impossible problems, and how can we think about that as we embark on the next several months? I'm going to share my screen. So I want to start with a quote from the recent book that I built around this idea, Teaching a Future President, Empowering Students to Take on Almost Impossible Problems. What if we treated each child's education as if they would one day take on the responsibilities and face the intense demands of the presidency? How would our approach to education look different than it does now? What impact would it have on our students? Imagine the potential that almost impossible problem solvers could offer to every field, whether it be medicine, technology, public health, the arts, or business, in every context, whether it be personal, interpersonal, or within a community, a country, or the world. Unfortunately, too many students in too many classrooms in too many schools fail to receive a powerful education. When that happens, they miss out on the profound impact a transformative education can have. But they aren't the only ones who miss out. A deep-seated belief in the inherent potential of all of our children, coupled with the will and ability to provide powerful learning experiences that help them realize their potential, is what is required if we are to live up to the promise of our communities, our countries, and our world. We are better off individually and collectively if we all get better at taking on almost impossible problems. In the book, I explore the knowledge, and the skills, and the mindsets that are required to take on almost impossible problems, and explore what sort of learning experiences actually help nurture and develop those skills. But for today's talk, I actually want to not focus on the students, I want to focus on the educators. What knowledge, skills, and mindsets do us educators need to face the challenges that we're currently confronted with? And I'm going to focus on the fundamental question: what knowledge, skills, and mindsets must educators develop and nurture in order to effectively serve their schools, their systems, and their communities? While I believe that quite a few knowledge, skills, and mindsets are required in this moment of time, I'm just going to focus in on three particular ones. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but it is meant to be a starting point for a conversation about what are the things that we as the adults in the system need to nurture in order to be able to approach the coming months and the coming years in a way that's effective and that pursues justice. And the three I'm going to focus on are leadership, collaboration, and justice. So how can educators nurture and develop these knowledge, skills, and mindsets? So focusing first on leadership. Under leadership, I want to focus on one particular aspect, which is strategic leadership. As leaders, how do we develop a strategic mindset about our work? I'm going to offer a quote about strategy. Strategy is about choosing what to do, and just as importantly, choosing what not to do. Good ideas and worthwhile activities almost always outweigh the resources available to pursue them. By choosing a coherent set of actions that together are most likely to lead to desired results, an organization can put its scarce resources to work more effectively and accomplish the objectives it sets out to achieve. So for a moment, you can consider how strategic is your organization? Does that quote resonate with your reality? Many of us are under very scarce resources. We feel stretched. And we might also feel that our organizations pursue a hodgepodge of different activities and pet projects and initiatives. And there isn't this coherent strategic direction. Absolutely one of the skills that we will need to develop in this moment of time is a discipline to being strategic, to be intentional about our purpose and the set of activities we're going to lean into to pursue that purpose. And the extent to which that is clearly understood by our communities will influence whether or not we're going to be able to make clear, effective progress. So consider your organization. How strategic is it? How coherent is the strategy? And does it actually pursue a worthwhile aim? I'm going to offer a few insights about what might go into a strategy. A few characteristics of a well-crafted strategy. It connects to purpose. Again, a strategy is not neutral. It is oriented to some ultimate goal. So a strategy isn't good or bad. A strategy is either well-aligned or ill-aligned to a particular purpose. It provides focus. It helps people understand what you're attempting to do, who you're attempting to serve. It guides choices. If everyone within an organization understands the strategy, they'll be able to make decisions about what activities, what decisions to pursue, and where to invest time. It illuminates relationships. As a teacher, I understand how my work feeds into the guidance counselor, and they understand how their work feeds into the psychologist, and they might understand how their work feeds into the principal. The relationships between individuals are illuminated, and you can connect how every piece fits together. It defines measurement parameters. When you have a clear strategy, you know what to look for, you know how to monitor your progress, how to look for leading indicators to make sure that you're making progress and to adjust as necessary. It addresses the external environment. So it recognizes the various stakeholders, it recognizes the changes in the external environment, and it allows for adaptation, recognizing that what might have been an effective strategy last month may no longer be an effective strategy. So consider those different characteristics of an effective strategy and whether or not your school, your system, your organization has a strategic directive that is characterized by those features. And if not, which elements you might need to shore up. The second category that I would like to talk about is collaboration. Under collaboration, I want to explore 4 fundamental questions. This is based off of an article I wrote just this past spring, 4 guiding questions for effective remote collaboration. But the 4 questions expand beyond just remote collaboration and offer some guidance to any group that's attempting to work together. 4 questions that any group can ask itself as they attempt to collaborate, and they all start with P. The first is purpose. What's our team's purpose? How well aligned and understood is the team's purpose? Does the team know what they're trying to do? The second is people. Who's on our team and who's not on our team? And what are our roles and responsibilities? How do we organize the work that we're doing? The third is process. How does our team work together? How do we make decisions? How do we share updates? How do we collaborate? What are the main processes through which we achieve our work? And the fourth is pride. How does our team take pride in its work? As we venture into these next several months, making pretty critical decisions about what happens next year, what happens in the years to come, undoubtedly, we're going to need to be working in highly collaborative teams. Unfortunately, many of our teams fail to reach the potential. If you consider the knowledge, the skills, the expertise, the perspectives, the creativity of the individuals on your team, and then consider how your team is currently operating, there's likely a gap between where your team could be and where your team currently is. Closing that gap is going to be critical. We need our teams to be working at their most effective. And in order to do that, we need to get clear on purpose. What are our collaborative teams trying to do? We need to get clear on our people, who's on our teams, how are we distributing these responsibilities, especially if those have shifted in the last few months. The process, again, how do we actually do our work? Again, likely those have shifted over the last few months. And then pride. How do we make sure that we take the time to really elevate the things that are going well? So I've got a quick suggestion for each one of these questions, something to consider. So first, for purpose. One recommendation is with your collaborative team to test goal consensus. This means that you actually assess whether or not your team has consensus around what it's trying to achieve, as in your goal. And that can simply be done by asking the question, can we review what our objective is right now? What is it that we're trying to do? From many of the teams that I've interacted with over the last few months, it's been clear that not all teams have been in consensus with what their goal is. So in the transition to remote learning, some members of some teams in schools have seen our goal is to find ways to best support our staff and best support our students' emotional and social well-being, and make sure that everyone's in a place where they feel safe with some certainty and have access to the resources they need for their health and well-being. Others might have seen their purpose as to, as quickly as possible, get back to business as usual, to get back to the routines and schedules of the daily school. Others might have seen the goal as to reinvent or rethink what's possible in school and to actually use this opportunity to make learning more authentic and more community-based. Those all represent 3 very different purposes. And while they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, they do reflect very different directions that the team can go. And if the team never coalesces on a clear, coherent purpose, collaborating with one another is going to be very difficult. So with your collaborative team, test your goal consensus, get on the same page. This relates to the earlier point we made about strategy. What is it that you're trying to achieve? After purpose, we've got people. Who's on our team and what are our roles and responsibilities? Here the recommendation is to ask whose voice is missing. The power of collaboration is to bring in individuals who think and see and experience the world differently to create a more complete picture of the problem so they can develop more creative, more thoughtful, more intentional decisions. I've got a quote here: since collaborative teams don't start their work with the assumption that they fully understand the problem, the team must ensure that its membership is inclusive enough to build a comprehensive picture of the problem or the opportunity. So as you're collaborating over these next several months, you might consider whose voice is at the table. Whose voice could really add some nuance, some texture, another perspective to the conversations as we're making decisions. And I see a lot of teams doing that right now, bringing in teacher voices, bringing in leader voices, bringing in student voices, bringing in voices from the community. Each one of these voices brings with it a certain perspective and a certain vantage on the problem that we're trying to solve. All of those perspectives taken together gives everyone a more complete picture of the problem. Without that complete picture of the problem, it's very difficult for collaborative teams to actually develop solutions that reflect the complexity of the problem that they're actually trying to solve. The third P is process. The question here is, how does our team work together? And here my recommendation is to collaborate, but not on everything. And I'm actually a very strong advocate of collaboration, but I also fully recognize the level of investment of resources, of time, of energy, true collaboration takes. That's because the collaborative process is very intensive. Here the quote is, rather than immediately brainstorming solutions, the team must first investigate the problem. Rather than working to build quick consensus, the team should encourage divergent perspectives. Rather than assume they have the expertise to develop a solution, the team should seek widely for input and insight. Notice that this collaborative process might look very different than cooperating or coordinating efforts. And because it looks very different, and because it's so time intensive, it's important to reserve the most important, complex, thorny problems for the collaborative efforts. If we try to collaborate on everything, we likely won't be able to invest the amount of time that true collaboration takes. That's why one of the fundamental leadership questions is deciding on which of these challenges, on which of these decisions does a collaborative effort make sense, and where do we just simply delegate? If there is clear expertise, if there are clear best practices, if the problem is more routine or more simple or less complex, we might just delegate the responsibility for taking on that problem to certain individuals with the requisite expertise or knowledge or skill set. But for those problems that are truly thorny, that are sticky, that are stubborn, that really require individuals to come together to share divergent perspectives, to share different skill sets, then we make the investment to collaborate. The final P is pride. Here the question is, how does the team actually take pride in their work? And here the recommendation is to really find time to celebrate your progress. There are many things that we could focus on, many challenges, many frustrations, and that's important and that's good, and that's what leaders have to do in this time. But it's also important not to ignore the successes that we're having on a regular basis. And to do this, I suggest to create regular routines that allow your team to reflect on your progress, to share and highlight small wins, and to actually acknowledge the successes that you are having. These might be small, these might be big, but without doing this, it might be difficult for the team to actually connect to its broader purpose and see the impact that it's having. So in this second category of collaboration, consider the teams that you're currently on, consider your current context, and consider these 4 questions regarding purpose. What's our team's purpose? People, who's on our team and who's responsible for what? Process, how do we organize ourselves? How are we actually conducting our work? And pride, how do we make sure to find time and energy to celebrate those successes? And think about where your team might be strong and where you might consider shoring up some of these categories. The final category that we're going to talk about is justice? And for this, I want to start with a quote. Again, from my book, how can we expect our students to believe in the power of a more inclusive and just society if they don't experience inclusion and justice within their classrooms and schools? How are we preparing future presidents to serve in the name of justice for all if they are subject to inequitable and unjust practices in their daily lives as students? As educators, how do we build our classrooms, schools, and systems to model and reflect better versions of society and not replicate and reinforce the worst elements of our current version? So under justice, I want to offer a few reflection questions to think about whenever we're making decisions, whenever we're developing our strategy, whenever we're enacting our work as educators. The first is whose perspectives are valued and whose are ignored. Whenever a group comes together, status, biases, power dynamics can influence the perspectives we hear, the perspectives that we listen to, the perspectives that we elevate, and those that we ignore and may shut down. Asking this question, whose perspectives are we valuing in these decisions, in this approach, in this process, is a fundamental question of justice. 2 is who has power and voice and who is silenced. 3rd is how are resources allocated, to whom, for what purpose, and with what goal in mind. Resources are traditionally seen as money, but you can consider what problems are we spending the most time addressing? How are we allocating our people? Who's responding to what? What issues are we elevating in our teams, in our community meetings, in our staff meetings? And what is the ultimate goal with our resource allocation? Next is about decisions. How are decisions made and communicated? Who is involved? Who's at the decision-making table? What is the decision-making process? What is the criteria we use to make those decisions? And how do we ensure that those decisions are communicated in a way that is clear to all stakeholders? And within a given decision, always asking ourselves, who does this decision serve and who is underserved by this decision? The conversations and the decisions in the coming weeks and months and years will have enormous impact, and they always have, but particularly with so much uncertainty and so much possibility to either exacerbate inequities in our systems and our schools, or in fact find creative, innovative, justice-oriented ways to close those gaps. These questions are incredibly important. So now again, I want you to turn back to your own team, to your organization, and think about these questions of justice. How are decisions made? How are resources allocated? Whose perspectives are valued and elevated? Who is silenced? Who has power? Who has voice? And how are you threading these questions into your daily work? Not putting them on the side as a side project, but actually infusing the work of equity and justice into all of the processes that you do, baking it into your strategy, into your collaboration, into your leadership. So to wrap things up, we started with talking about almost impossible problems and the need for to develop our students' capacity to address these challenging problems, both interpersonal, interpersonal within their communities, within their society, but also thinking about us as the adults, as the educators, how we also need to nurture these very same skills and mindsets, develop these knowledge. We are facing, and we always have been facing, almost impossible problems. Our challenges of educators has always been great, and we need to be intentional about developing these very same skills of leadership, collaboration, and justice. So thank you for joining me, It's been a pleasure. I look forward to interacting with many of you live in the upcoming live sessions. And please stay in touch. Thank you very much.